you can have the best will in the world, but if you don't have the necessary skills to support you, you will be either a fake leader or you will be utterly out of your depth. Invest in preparedness, not in prediction. In the boardroom, you're unlikely to be able to tap into this thing, and so you better be prepared. Over the years, what I have learned instead, over and above what I have shared with you, is the combination of will, skill, and mindset. So my ambition level has dropped a single bit since I came to this realization. But the how to make it to the next level, the how to be better in my craft right now as an executive coach has entirely shifted. One thing I've really learned, which can be a game changer for any leader at any level of leadership, is what I call strategic self-awareness, which in a way means knowing what you're great at, what are your motives, values.
Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of Business Unbound. Every week, I sit down with exceptional practitioners who share the mental models, the frameworks, and the instincts they have developed and acquired over the course of their careers. I'm your host, Florian Hoff. Today, I'm joined by Navid Nazemian. Navid works with senior leaders on executive transitions, leadership effectiveness, and what it takes to succeed when stepping into roles with higher complexity, higher visibility, and higher consequence. In today's conversation, Navid and I will discuss why leadership transitions are difficult, even for highly capable people. We will explore what leaders often misread when they step into a new role, how they build trust quickly, and what they need to unlearn, as well as how to avoid failing in a role where they qualify to take it but may not be prepared for the execution. Navid, welcome to Business Unbound.
Thank you so much, Florian. I am super stoked to have this conversation with you today.
I am stoked to have this conversation today. And Navid, to get us started for our audience members, can you explain what are you focused on professionally right now?
So my topic, I'm very boring in that I get very excited about one topic and one topic only, and that is the topic of our conversation today. So really at the heart of this topic is how can you make sure that as and when you step up into the C-suite, or if you're already part of the C-suite and you're stepping up into a role that is more complex, more troublesome than the current one, how to go about to get it right, how to avoid the biggest mistakes, and from an organizational lens perspective, how to support those senior leaders in transition. So that's my only topic that I will happily talk about any time of the day.
I did not mention purposefully that you've actually undergone a similar transition yourself. You had executive roles in a large corporate. You were the global head of HR at Vodafone, and you have thereby worked at the center of large corporate leadership, talent, culture, executive decision making. For listeners, Navid, who may be meeting you for the first time, can you just broadly walk us through the key chapters of your former corporate career?
Sure. So I actually started my career unusually in sales. And, let's just keep this to be our little secret, Florian. I was pretty good at it. And one thing I really appreciated working in a sales function is the fact that you can be super transparently measured against the best of the best, which kind of, was very difficult to do when I moved into HR because, in HR, obviously you're not in charge of selling anything. If anything, you are selling initiatives and people, strategies and people operation plans to business leaders. But that was the first 6 years. And I wanted to transition into the people function. I really discovered my passion to move into HR. And at the time, this is the year 2002, nobody wanted to take a chance with me because I didn't have a relevant HR background. And, at the time in Germany, it was very black and white. They looked at my resume and said, sorry, you haven't studied HR, you don't have relevant experience in HR. Why would we want to hire you? Anyhow, as they say, it takes one opportunity, one individual. And the lady who gave me the chance, her name is Dania Frech. She was the head of HR at Adidas, the iconic 3-star brand company. She told me, look, you're not going to be my typical HR hire for very obvious reasons, but I am willing to give you a chance because you are most likely going to be the only HR person that we are going to hire into the company who has sold our products previously. So that's how the circle became a bit more full. And I started at the lowest level in the HR function. I was the assistant HR manager. And mind you, Florian, nobody in HR gave me any cookie points for the 6 years that I had wasted in sales. That's at least how they looked at it. And it took me on a journey for the next 20 years to come. So I moved from Adidas to General Electric, EE. At the time in the year 2005, the world's most admired company on the planet. Very different story today, but at the time they were at the height. I then moved on to a fast-moving consumer goods company called British American Tobacco, or BAT. Worked for 6 years there in 4 different countries, and then moved on again to work for Roche pharmaceutical company based out of Switzerland. That role almost broke my neck because it was the first global HR role that I stepped into, clearly underestimating what it takes to succeed at the global leadership level. And then after 3 years, I was headhunted to move to the wonderful company called Vodafone. 3 years worked in Germany as the number 2 in HR. And then the last 5 years, I was the global head of HR, supporting the group CFO and her finance leadership team, and being in charge of the 27,000 employees in the finance function in 24 markets. So that was my second stint as a global HR.
Well, it's a huge responsibility, and it clearly shows how dedication can lead to the role that you have potentially desired when you stepped into HR the first time.
Absolutely. And let me also say that I can look back at it and rate it as a very valuable experience. I never repeated the industry. So every single time I moved companies, I also swapped industries. And that sort of made it extra hard on myself because there was nothing industry specific that I could apply to this other industry. There were some best practices that I was very keen to cross-fertilize and apply, but I made it super hard, also internationally. I mean, I moved around and I lived and worked in 5 countries. And every time I moved to a new country, there's obviously the intercultural challenge that will come.
And out of curiosity, I mean, what happened next? What prompted you to step out of your corporate career?
Yes, so this was unexpected and entirely not planned. I wish I had this long-term vision, the strategic roadmap to say 10 years from now, I want to do this, this, and this. The honest truth is it all just happened. So in the year 22, my book launched, and much to my surprise, and I think also to the surprise of my publisher in New York City, it became a #1 new release on Amazon. It was a best-selling book in the first week of its launch in the US, which is by far the largest market for thought leadership books, much bigger than India or China. And very quickly, it became a bestseller in Switzerland, in the UK, in Germany, and many more countries. And I suddenly had very interesting people, Florian, such as yourself, who came forward and said, "Hey, I would love to interview you for my show. Can you come next month and speak at our Global Leadership Conference? Can you come? Would you be happy to coach these 10 leaders in my company?" And I realized very quickly that next to my full-on HR senior director role, there was no way I could attend to any of these exciting requests that came my way. And so I thought to myself at the time, this is roughly 4 years ago, if not now, when? And I went all in and I thought to myself, if this goes horribly wrong, I can always come back to a corporate role. But luckily, touching wood, it's been 4 years and I never had to look back.
Right. And I leave it to you if you want to plug your book or name what it's called for our audience members. Please do so.
Sure. The book is called Mastering Executive Transitions, The Definitive Guide, and it was published 4.5 years ago.
Then, Navid, let's actually start getting a little bit deeper into the weeds of our conversation today. And I first want to talk with you about what large organizations teach you or taught you about leadership. And I would argue that large organizations, they reveal leadership in a very specific way. You see ambition, you see talent, but then you also see politics, you see culture, you see incentives, you see performance, and all of these elements, they move and interact. Now, when you reflect at your own career, what did working in a large global company like Vodafone or also the others teach you about how leadership really works?
Yes. So I actually had both experiences. Today, I can say, luckily, it wasn't so pleasant at the time, which means what are leadership principles and behaviors I would love to learn and emulate and demonstrate as a leader myself. And very clearly, Florian, what are some of the leadership traits, or as Dr. Robert Hogan calls them, dark side traits, that I definitely don't want to demonstrate or live up to? And, at one point, I mean, I think Vodafone was a great story, because in the 8 years I worked for that organization, I had 5 line managers. So the leadership churn was unexpectedly high, and that also meant months I had to adjust to a new leader again after trying to adjust to the previous one, and only after 6 months the previous lady was fired and the new guy arrived. So coming back to your question, I think one thing I've really learned, which can be a game changer for any leader at any level of leadership, is, and it sounds very simplistic, but it's what I call strategic self-awareness, which in a way means knowing what you're great at, what are your motives, values, and preferences, so what conditions have to be met so that you can be at your best. And at the same time, having a good degree of awareness around what is it like to be around you when you are pushed into a corner and stressed out and reacting in a very different way. And so it's the combination of those three things being, what is it like to be on your bright side of personality traits? What conditions have to be met so that you can be there? And as and when things are not working out for you, and I've had many of such instances coming my way, what is it like to be around you? What kind of a leader will you turn into that may or may not be visible to the people who report into you?
And can you perhaps share by means of example what these 3 elements looked like for you personally, including the not so nice elements?
Yes. So I think one thing that really served me well was my sense of curiosity. And if anyone is familiar with the Hogan assessment, the instrument that I also apply in my coaching practice, I'm a master black belt advanced practitioner in Hogan. But just very simply, one of the dimensions is called learning approach, and I am very high on that. And that means that I'm genuinely a curious individual. And that also means that, unlike some very famous world politicians who walk into the boardroom and claim that they have knowledge on everything, I am one that walks into a boardroom and doesn't claim anything to know, but I'm here to learn. And if I can, I will add value by adding my thoughts or my questions to the ongoing conversation. So that's, I think, something that's really served me well. And admittedly, at the beginning of my career, it was easy when I was an individual contributor. As soon as I moved into becoming a first-time manager, I was a little more hesitant or conservative with admitting anything I didn't know. But I learned over the years that even at the most senior level, at the C-suite executive level, it probably will serve you better to not appear to be a complete product or someone who has figured everything out in every imaginable angle, but really being curious and walking into conversations, sometimes coaching conversations, without this belief that you have figured everything out. So that's the first trait. The second one was my desire to want to improve. And that was really given to me as an advice by a mentor very early on. This is before I actually studied. In the 3 years I worked as a sales individual. And the name of the individual was 𝐘𝐞. And he, I approached him on my first day of being a sales associate in a retail outlet. And I said, 𝐘𝐞, I've never sold in my life, but I want to be good at it. So what advice do you have for me as someone who has been in the trenches for 2 decades? And he said 2 things. The first one is, you don't have to be great at anything. All you need to make sure is that you become better at the same thing every single day. So you need to improve from where you are. Every single day, it's all about incremental improvement, not about the being grandiose kind of gestures. And the second thing I can recommend you is to really, truly put yourself in the shoes of the customer that you are trying to sell into. And that, by the way, also means that if they come to our store and they want to buy a certain product and they are very passionate about buying that product and that product only, rather than offering them an alternative product that is not what they want, to actually give them the advice where they can obtain that one product that they so desire to buy. And that means that long term, they will build a relationship and trust, and they will come back to you for other products and for other things. And so that was really the beginning of a great journey for me in sales and later on in HR, which meant that I never claimed to know everything. I walked in with a good degree of curiosity, but more importantly, knowing that I will improve from my current baseline, no matter what. And so that was the second leadership wisdom. And probably the third one that I had to learn very, very late in my career is the fact that humility or vulnerability, demonstrating a healthy degree of that, is probably going to do more benefit for your leadership and your standing than self-confidence or courage, as it's often cited by various books and authors at the same time.
So you would say self-confidence and courage are the same thing?
See, when you have very high degrees of self-confidence or courage, it may or may not work out for you. Unless you are known to be the world's foremost authority on, let's take a silly example, Messi, who yesterday, scored another 2 goals and got the Hall of Fame, whatever entry. Unless you're at that level of your game, you will have things to learn and you will have things to admit. And the earlier you admit that you're not the subject matter expert on this particular topic, the easier it is for you to open up and start to learn and start to add value on the same topic. And that's what I have found. So if you have too much of self-confidence, if you have too much of courage, that actually doesn't work for you.
But isn't part of being courageous also recognizing where you still have things to learn?
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to flip it around like that, yeah, that would make total sense to me. I actually work with a framework that I invented myself. So this is not based on deep research or, Harvard Business Review, citing this particular piece of research. And I speak about the 6 qualities of outstanding leaders. And the first 2, just to stay on the topic, are having confidence, but also having a high degree of self-awareness. And, again, without citing any world famous politician right now, someone who's too full of themselves and assumes that they have figured every single challenge in the world without advising anyone,
yes,
is probably not a good thing if at the same time you can't look in the mirror and admit, humbly that you may not be great at everything all at the same time. So these 2 qualities are what I call self-leadership, and they help you to expand your effectiveness and identity as a leader. And there is 4 more. If you wanted me, I could also share those with you.
Yeah, please. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. So the next 2 qualities, so this is quality number 3 and 4, are being connected and being inspiring. Being connected means, even though you may be the group CEO of a large organization and there is someone who is, vacuum cleaning the floor because it's very late in the evening, everyone else has left the building. If you are able to have a meaningful conversation with that individual on anything, on the weather, on the football match, on their work, on the company, on whatever feels appropriate at the time, that is a sign that you can relate to other people and you can deeply connect with them. And the 4th quality is inspiring, meaning, and I can use an actual example. So I was a young student at the time, and one of my professors gave me a free ticket to a leadership conference at the time in Frankfurt am Main. And so I drove up to Frankfurt am Main and I saw some of the most incredible world thought leaders in action on the big stage. And one of them was Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits. Florian, I kid you not, I was in the room. I was like the journalist, like I had a press pass from I was writing the blog for our university at the time. I was in a room with 24 real live journalists. I was like the rookie journalist out of those 24. When this guy walked in and he started to talk to us, I felt I'm the only individual in the room with him. I mean, I get goosebumps when I say that. It was really something else. And some leaders just have this ability to really speak to you, although they are in a town hall meeting with 1,000 people on the floor. They will make you feel that you are the only person they're speaking to. So these are qualities 3 and 4. And qualities 5 and 6 are courage and clarity. Courage meaning having a good, healthy dose of self-confidence, having a good degree of not just waiting and hoping that the storm is going to go away, but setting the course of your ship and getting the crew behind to really maneuver your ship out of the storm. But at the same time, without clarity is like, you have an eye mask on your head and then you're trying to land the plane. So clarity, and these two are paying a dividend on your business leadership, and they help you to elevate the results. So confident and self-aware are touching upon your self-leadership, and they help you to expand your identity. Connected and inspiring is your team leadership aspect, and they help you to enhance your impact beyond your individual self. And courage and clarity are the last remaining two qualities that help you to, elevate results because they pay a dividend on your business leadership.
Let's perhaps take half a step back. You mentioned a few sentences ago how you like to think about leadership in an organizational context, and you explained, okay, there are conditions that have to be true for you to be at your best. And then you also explained recognizing how it is to be around you when things are not going your way, if you're pushed into a corner.
Mhm.
Using yourself as an example, and I hope I'm not putting you on a spot here, how are you in a business context when you are being pushed in a corner? And think more importantly, what do you do about it?
Yes. So there are three general tendencies as per the Hogan assessment, how an individual might react when they are pushed into a corner and stressed out. The first tendency is to move away from the person or situation. And so, this is if assuming I have a big argument with my wife or with my boss. And after about half an hour, I feel that I have tried to strike a meaningful conversation, but I'm not getting anywhere. And if I had that tendency, which I don't, I would say, you know what, boss, I'm going to go for a walk, come back and have another go at this because it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. Our conversation is not really getting anywhere. And maybe that's my wife that I'm speaking to. The second tendency, which is kind of my trouble zone, Florian, I've been very public about that, is the tendency to move against the person or situation, meaning it's either my way or the highway. It's either I will kill you, literally, figuratively speaking, with my argument, because my argument is so much more superior than yours. My brain is so much bigger than yours. My thinking is so much more eloquent and sophisticated than yours. And that's why I will prove you wrong. I will prove you to be the inferior in this battle that we are going to have. So there are 4 scales that make up this part. 3 out of the 4 scales for me are in the trouble zone. And then the third tendency would be to move towards the person or situation, meaning you raise your hand. These are the hostage negotiators that do a great job. Like I would be a very poor hostage negotiator because if they brought me in and said, some gangster has walked into a branch of this bank and there are 20 people now captured inside this branch and we want you to negotiate the way out of this, I would probably take up the phone and say, look, if you don't send out your hostages immediately, I'm going to send you a nuclear bomb, right? And that is probably not a good discussion to have with a hostage negotiator, with a hostage taker. But the person who is good in that, moving towards, will find a way to negotiate a good agreement. Meaning they would probably say, look, I know what do you want? And the person would say, I want $1 million in cash. And I want it now. And they would say, okay, it will take me an hour to get the cash to you, but I need a sign of goodwill from you right now. And you either trust me on this or you don't. It's your choice. I will make everything possible in my power to get you the money within the next 60 minutes. And if you wanted to meet me, I would suggest you release all the women and the children in your capacity right now. And so you will still have more than 10 people in the branch, you will still have your leverage. I just feel it's a good thing for us to meet halfway. And so my trouble zone is the moving against. Now, the second part of your question, which is very insightful, is what do you do about it? And so there are many, many strategies and tactics you can apply. Some of the simpler ones that you are more likely to be able to do in the moment is that split second between saying what you actually want to say to the person that is having the argument with you and deciding whether that is the most wise thing to say and or the how of how you want to get the message across. That split second, that decision as to how is this going to land or not, is this actually helpful or not, is one of the tactics. The other one is to count to 5 or 10 if you can, then giving the response. And if this is a very angry email that you're about to send to someone, general advice is save that email as a draft, come back to it in an hour or so, and then decide if this is really the email you want to send to this individual. So those are just 3 ways how you can work with this being triggered by something that is clearly not getting the best out of you.
Fair enough. And actually on the last point, I think we all have these moments where we are so annoyed by someone or something happening, which is typically just a matter of misunderstanding. But anyway, that you just rage type your email. And then in my mind and application, AI is very good at neutralizing the message that you want to convey, in that you tell the AI Copilot or whatever it is that you're using, I have this email, I'm very angry, please professionalize my tone and make it digestible for an organization, for the recipient of that message.
Yes, agreed.
And then, Navid, speaking a little bit further about leadership in a corporate setting, so to speak, can you just briefly differentiate the traits that leaders who are effective bring versus the traits that they are potentially missing out on?
So with regards to transitions, is this, those that get it right and those that don't get it right, you want me to distinguish between the two?
Please do so.
Yeah. So the first group, if I wanted to speak about those that feel incredibly competent and fully accomplished and they have figured everything out. So let's just stick with them, because it's also more fun to state what they all miss out on. And there are very many cases I actually cite in my book. So if people wanted to read it up, it was the easiest part of the research, Florian. If at the time when I wrote my book, there was no ChatGPT available. So you would use good old Google, MetaGear, and all the classic search engines. If you were to type in epic CEO transition failures, you would find thousands and thousands of pages and names of individuals who have failed spectacularly at the top. And I have selected the most juicy ones. And in my book, I speak about those. So if I wanted to use an actual example of someone who's actually done all the mistakes that they were not supposed to make, and then come back and say how they could have done it, I think that would probably make it super relevant for your audience. So this is the name of the gentleman. And for the record, I've never met this individual. All I know about the individual is from research and searching the web. So his name is Dr. Leo Apotheker, and he was appointed to Hewlett-Packard, HP at the time, to take over as the group chief executive officer, so the most senior position in the company. And he was brought in by the board of directors, which in German is the Aufsichtsrat, with one mandate. HP was actually pretty successful in everything they did. This is more than 20 years ago, so they were super successful in the printers business. They had printers for home, they had printers for the office, they had laser printers, inkjet printers, every single category of printing. Essentially, they were like dominating the printing. They were also great at personal computers. I remember having a laptop from HP. I remember having PCs like towers from HP and many more. And they were also great at the server business. So those 3 businesses, they were world markets dominating. And why the board of directors decided to bring him in was simply because they looked at Google, Apple, kind of the more nimble, agile, aggressive tech players. And HP was more like a Microsoft, big, slow, kind of, making safe bets and going all in. And so the board of directors at the time, they had the strategy offside, and they thought over the long run, we are going to lose out against those aggressive players because we are playing it safe. And so in order to change the company culture towards a more tech, agile, aggressive type, we need to bring someone in who has worked in that environment and has done that. That was the promise of Dr. Leo Apotheker. Now, over the first 6 months, this gentleman went around, as it's very common as a new CEO, to what is referred to as a listening tour. So he visited large sites, manufacturing sites, he met with suppliers, he met with key accounts, he met with large number of employees. And especially in those town hall sessions, he started to badmouth the existing culture of HP, to say what a poor company culture that was, and how that culture would never work for them 5 years from now, and how great it was in his previous company called SAP, and how much everyone needed to, buckle up and move more towards the SAP culture. Now, I don't think you have to be a CHRO or an executive coach to see that approach is unlikely to yield any meaningful results. If anything, it will work in a the opposite direction way. So engagement is going to drop. People will stop to listen to you. If you are thinking this company is really so bad, what did you join in the first place? And by the way, why would I want to, put my energy, efforts, and everything behind what you are saying? So very quickly, it started to deteriorate. And then from there on, it only took him 10 months before he was fired. And HB had to pay him $7.2 million as part of his contractual agreement. Now, imagine the same individual who was brought in with a clear mandate to change the company culture around. And assuming this individual hired me as his executive transition coach. So first thing is, I would start to work with him before he is in the new position, meaning as soon as he signed his contract or as soon as it's announced that he will be the incoming CEO, I would start to do the work with him. And for that, I would look at the 7-phase double diamond framework that is in my book. The first phase is your day minus 90 to day 0, meaning there's so many things Leo Apotheker, as my client, can do before he's in the role. He can start to educate himself about the culture of HB. He can start to do the competitor analysis to see what from the existing culture is actually pretty good and worthwhile to be kept and what aspects needed to change. He could then start to look at best practices around how to bring culture change at such a huge organization level, and what are some of the tried and tested and proven methods for getting this right. He could start to have engagement conversations with the board and the chair and members of the board to really be clear on what they really want him to achieve. He could start to introduce himself to the leadership team that he's going to inherit and making a mark already before starting in the role. Now assume he's in phase 2, which is your typical first 90 days. And he's traveling all around the world and doing exactly what he did. This time, though, he's not bragging about his PhD and MBA, but he's actually putting up a personal image of him and his family. He's there to listen. As my grandpa used to say, son, make proportionate use of your ears and mouth, because there's a reason that dear God has given you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So don't make grand statements. Don't badmouth the current company culture. Ask the crowds 3 questions. First one is, what has served us well in the past? It could be a behavior trait, a cultural belief, whatever that is, and will continue to serve us well in the future. Mentee type, where people can just take out the phone and just, give in the input. Second question is, what is the one thing that we will need to stop doing? Because whilst it may or may not have served us well in the past, it certainly is not going to serve us well going into the future. And the third thing is, what is the one thing, a habit, an action, or something we need to start to demonstrate that we have never demonstrated before? Now imagine on the back end of this 3 months listening tour, he has obviously the tool and his team crunching the numbers and crunching the ideas. And he then comes back to the same audience and says, thank you so much for your input. This is what I have heard you saying. These are the 2 or 3 things we must continue to demonstrate, because they have served us well in the past and they will continue to serve us well. These are the 2 or 3 things we need to stop demonstrating, because you have told me that they are unlikely to serve us well going forward. And these are the 2 or 3 habits or things we need to start demonstrating, because they are certainly going to serve us well in the future. Now, same approach, just very different way of going about it. And imagine the output you're likely to have. Imagine the level of engagement you're going to get from your employee base and the buy-in at the board and at the EXCO level. Same individual, just different approaches.
Can we perhaps make this more concrete and bring it one level deeper, based on your experience and possibly on the experience of the clients that you've worked with, of course, without giving any names? I think that's not necessary. Can you give examples of answers to the 3 questions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, not talking about HB now, but more broadly speaking, one trait we must stop doing is, computer says no, or looking at topics more in a black and white way, which is what maybe I have done in the past. And unless we are running a nuclear power plant, which, may dictate that we are very black and white about what we can do, what we can't do, we want to do that more often. One thing we have never done before, which the big tech players are doing, demonstrated very visibly. I think Google is the best example for that, Floria. I mean, I still see Google when you go on the Google website and they got all the, you click on the ... field and you see all the products and services they have. Oftentimes, it still says better, which is the core of a minimum viable product. This is what Microsoft and HP used to do back in those days, which is you need to spend 5 years on R&D and you need to develop an idea so far that you're almost ready to go to market, and only then you're going to go to market. No, you can go to market with a minimum viable product just to see if the consumer is responding positively to that. And if they do, you take it and tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak, and then, have a customer base that is loyal to the product range and more keen to buy more and more of the same. So these are just some examples to share with you as to what are some start doing or stop doing activities and what may result as part of this, big listening tour of an incoming chief executive.
How about things that we are good at and should continue to be doing? What are examples that come to mind?
I mean, one thing we really, and I can cite the company Roche when I was working for them for 3 years, is, their tagline was doing now what patients need next. And obviously there's a marketing tagline and all that, but the reality is Roche at the time, still today, had committed to pump anywhere between 8 to 10 billion Swiss francs into the R&D pipeline. By the way, no matter what comes out of it, right? Which is a bold statement. I mean, I know if you look at Pfizer, they are like this, right? This year it's 5 billion, next year it's 10, 2 years later there's only 1 billion. So depending on how much they earn, they adjust their spend on R&D, which means their pipeline is going up and down all the time. Roche just committed to the excellence in science. And if you look at the history of Roche against any of their peers, over the long term, they are beating out a lot of their much bigger competitors, because this commitment to excellence in science and to wanting to get closer to what patients need next is happening today. And that's the one thing they're committed to honor and preserve and maintain going forward.
I had a guest previously who specializes in innovation management, and he made this very interesting analogy that you explained, reminded me of that. R&D is you put money in and you get ideas out, and innovation management is you put ideas in and you get money out. I found that very, very interesting. Would you say this is true also for the observations that you have made?
I'm not claiming to be an innovation guy, but just the simple truth, the way you told to me, seemed to make a lot of sense.
Now, perhaps back to executive transitions and also the diamond that you referred to. We spoke about 90 days before coming in, 90 or 100, how many days after you get in. What happens next?
Yes. So the double diamond, this is phase 3, which is your phase 91. So day 91 to day 120. So essentially your 4th month in the role. That phase is called adapt. And that means, using the example of the Apotheker, this is the moment where you need to start to show some adaptation to the existing company culture. Bearing in mind that you were brought in to change the culture around, but having done the exercise properly, you also know that there are certain traits that you want to maintain. And this is where you need to show that you are able to adapt to a company culture that is arguably very different than the SAP culture that was probably more cutthroat and more agile, nimble than the HP culture is like. And at the same time, the organization needs to adapt to your needs, because arguably you're now the big kid on the block. And you come with a mandate and you have some ideas that you also want to. So that's what's happening in phase 3. That gets us to phase 4. I titled this phase the mobilize phase. This is where I use the example of Dr. Hannes Ametsreiter, who came to Vodafone Germany as the CEO. And I worked with him very closely at the time. And he was brought in because Vodafone Germany at the time had 9 consecutive quarters of revenue drop and profitability drop. So for, more than 2 years, they have had declining revenue and profitability. And that was not a great state to be in. And so the company fired the existing CEO and they brought him in. And he really had to, and this is his month 4 to 6, bear in mind, he really had to work hard to get to the same outcomes I just described to you with what do we need to keep and so on. He didn't quite do it the same way. But this is where you need to mobilize the organization behind what you think is the right thing. And by the way, if you don't happen to be the CEO, which makes it a little easier for you, let's assume I'm the new chief sales officer, right? And marketing and sales are mine to look after. I need to get my peers, the CFO, the CHRO, the CTO, to come to the same conclusion as I did, which means I want them to support the sales transformation, the effectiveness of the sales force, whatever is on my agenda, to support me on that. So that happens in phase 4. That then gets us into phase 5, which I title Operate. This is your month 6 to 9 in an executive role. This is where you need to, this is where the rubber needs to hit the road, right? I know executives who have been fired in this phase because all they could do is, designing beautifully looking PowerPoint slides and not able to translate that into execution on the ground, right? I mean, some individuals are just bright individuals. They have the greatest ideas in the world, but they have never in the past been able to implement those ideas with a task force that is destined to make it happen. So this is your month 6 to 9, and that gets us into the 6th phase, which I title Nourish. And so this is your months 9 to 12, almost a year in the role. And Florian, this is so crucial. This was when Hannes Ametsreiter proved to the organization for the first time in 9 quarters that our revenue did not only drop, but it grew by a tiny bit. So the reverse was happening. So the decline turned into a little bit of a increase. This is super important because the hardest critiques of you in the company who say, "Oh, he's just another CEO. He's never going to make it happen. I give him a year and then he will be fired as well." They need to admit now they are the detractors on the NPS scale. They need to admit that something is working here. Your promoters will be all over the rooftops and shouting it from the rooftops to say, we told you, we told you, we told you, we can be profitable again. We can generate more revenue. And then those that are in the neutral zone, which is probably the majority of the organization, they will now start to edge a little more towards the promoter side, which then means, and that's the success story of Hannes Ametsreiter, that after about 15 months in the role, we now have proper growth coming our way. And then another quarter. And that's the change in belief that he was able to achieve with this idea that it will just take its time. And that sort of brings us to phase 7, which I titled Develop. And this phase is super important. It's at least 1 session, sometimes 2 sessions with the same exec. This is the phase where I will ask the executive before the session to sit down and jot down just some bullet points. What did you set out to achieve and what were you actually able to achieve in the last 12 months in the role? What assumptions did you make that turned out to be true and which ones turned out to be entirely wrong? What mistakes did you make along the way? And more importantly, what are some of the learnings from the sum of the mistakes that you made along the way? And so when they come to the session, we sit down and have this reflective space and we go back in time and look at every single major decision, assumption, and move they made, what went right, what didn't go right, and what is the learning of that. And that is my idea around making sure that the executive builds up their capability in the transition space and not only just got lucky because they hired me or someone like myself, but they are embodying this learning going forward, because it's quite likely, unless this is the last job before they retire, that they are going through a future career transition. And whatever learnings they have that they have been able to embody is going to serve them well in the future. And because my brain, Florian, never remembers more than 3 things at the same time, I titled every single phase of the Double Diamond framework so that if you were to add the 7 words together, you get to the word done.
Have you, in your own transition, gone through the phases that you described, or did they become, let's say, clear in hindsight and they are more product of your own lessons learned?
I've actually failed in phase 5, right, which is your month 6 to 9. This was when I moved from one of the world's most admired companies called Adidas into the other world's most admired company called GE. I resigned after only 8 months in the role. And I had to admit to myself at the time that I am irritating the heck out of everyone else. And this company and the culture and the way of working is irritating the heck out of. And there is one belief I have, which is if I'm not adding value, I might as well move myself out of the way. And that's what I did. And so I've been very open about that. And the biggest mistake I made was that I tried to copy and paste what had actually made me successful with Adidas. Adidas at the time was quite innovative in a way. It was all about the team. I mean, this is in the year 2002 when I joined them, and in 2005 I left them. There were no individual bonuses paid to any individual. There was only company bonus that came to the team. Meaning, if I'm a top performer or an okay performer, I will get the same level of bonus. Now, some companies are moving in that direction today. When I moved to GE, they invented the 9-box grid with McKinsey at the time, which means you have performance potential on the 2 axes. And there is this thing, the magical box called box 1. And if you end up in box 1 at the end of the year, you will get your promotion guaranteed. The top 20% will be promoted. The bottom 10% will be fired. And so that created a whole different dynamic. I mean, people taking their elbows out and working their way to box 1, box 2, which was unlike anything I had seen before. And against the spirit of the team and against the spirit of, we are one big family and we really want the best for our customers. And if we focus on that, everything else will fall in the right place. So it was cutthroat. It was very American for my taste, far too American. It was very much around individual achievement, individual stardom, heroism, and it just didn't work for me. And that's why I had to admit to myself that I'm unlikely to get far in this kind of an organization, and I might myself remove it from this organization.
What is this framework called again?
The double diamond framework.
No, the McKinsey framework.
It's the 9-box grid where you have performance and potential, 3 boxes on each line. And the higher your performance and the higher your potential, you end up in the highest box. And that it's a stack rank, essentially.
Navid, I have to try to challenge you a tiny little bit. I mean, within the framework, the diamond framework that you described, and this, let's say, very deliberate process in terms of transition, I would argue that in some situations and for leaders with some particular mandates, this may not be applicable, such as when you have a mandate to restructure a company entirely and you don't have the luxury to fly around the globe for 3 or 4 months where you have to hit the ground running, or when your mandate is cost out and cost transformation in particular. I would also argue that possibly your diamond framework is not applicable. Can you react to that?
Well, look, I mean, we have only touched upon the 7 phases. There's a lot more to the framework. And one of them is the 5 C's that the leader needs to bear in mind. Let's assume you have been appointed, Florian, to take over the reins at Adidas because Adidas is in dire straits and really the company is in a bad situation. And they are about to go bankrupt, which actually happened to them many, many decades before I joined them. So they were about to go bankrupt. And it's a true story. It was the executive assistant of the CEO who called her counterpart at a French bank that was the biggest mortgage lender to Adidas at the time. And she started crying and saying to her that she will likely lose her job at the end of the month because there's no more money to pay the salaries. And that her boss, this is the boss of the other lady on the other side, is responsible for that because he has said no to a loan to the company. And that lady heroically went to her boss and said, "How dare you stop paying the loan to this wonderful company?" Anyway, and they found a way, and Adidas was saved as a result. So Adidas would not exist today if it wasn't for the brave EA on both sides on the ocean. Now, the reality is, if that is your mandate, yes, you will have to, not pay as much attention to each phase. But the reality is, if you just come in and start to fire people left, right, and center without having some analysis done, without having some listening exercise done, you're unlikely to cut at the right places. And B, all you're going to get as a result of your cost cutting is going to create a lot of organizational anxiety, which in the short term is not going to get you the results you want. It's great if you cut costs, but ultimately you're there to achieve something. You want to sell products. You want to create products. You want to compete with Nike, Puma, whatever the name of the competitors are. So yes, and this is why, by the way, I selected phases and not stages. So this is not, you have to complete stage 1 before you can complete stage 2 and so on. And the idea of the diamond was that if you take a diamond and hold it against the light, there may be actually overlapping of these phases at the same time. yes, that mandate may be much more clear and your time available to you may be much shorter. But ultimately, if you were to broadly follow the logic of the framework, you're more likely to succeed than to
Fair. I think that's a good insight into your thinking here. Now, David, in the interest of time, let's start wrapping up our conversation today. And I'm a little bit curious, if you think back over the course of your career, what did you believe about effective leadership, say 10, 15, 20 years ago, that you now have a complete different opinion on?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have quite the brain to, offer myself the wisdom of the six qualities. And what I felt as a young leader and as someone who was, very highly ambitious and wanted to grow his career, and somehow I managed to do that, was that, winning is everything. That's what I thought of myself. And yeah, you may not have a big followership, but you know what? Nobody cares as long as you make the right next level promotion happen. And then I came to GE and I saw it firsthand what that silly belief will actually result into. And again, I said that with respect. At the time, a lot of other companies were headhunting from GE because GE was famous for having figured everything out in the realm of leadership. I just didn't resonate with that. And so over the years, what I have learned instead, over and above what I have shared with you, is the combination of will, skill, and mindset. So the will means you obviously want to improve. Hopefully, it may or may not be the next level of promotion, but it may be something that really broadens your leadership experience. And that's what I did with my international career. That's what I did with moving from local to regional to global roles. So really trying to bring more complexity into what I did. And that brings us to skill. So I spent 20 years in the HR domain, and I think I've done my fair share of HR trainings, HR programs, HR leadership development programs, and the like. And so again, you can have the best will in the world, but if you don't have the necessary skills to support you, you will be either a fake leader or you will be utterly out of your depth. And then the mindset is probably the most important thing. I've learned one thing in my career. Funnily enough, it only came to me when I started to educate myself to become a professional coach in the year 2014, was that the what matters as much as the how. And that was a hard admission to myself. So, one of the tasks we were given as students of coaching was to experiment for a month with meditation. And, in the year 2014, it wasn't quite as normal and hip, and there were not a gazillion apps around to help you do that. And I thought to myself, what a silly exercise and what a waste of my time this is going to be, because I could do 100 sit-ups in that, 20-minute long meditation, or I could ship another 20 to 50 emails out. Well, here I am, 12 years later, still doing my every single day, because I learned that the how matters as much to the what. So my ambition level hasn't dropped a single bit since I came to this realization that the how to make it to the next level, the how to be better in my craft right now as an executive coach has entirely shifted. And that is a wisdom that came to me quite late in my career. I wish it would have come to me much earlier.
Navid, what else is there that we should have talked about today but didn't?
I mean, maybe as a last word of wisdom, and it's not my words, it's from Nassim Taleb, who said this thing very wisely many years ago. He said, invest in preparedness, not in prediction. And I think in the world of AI and with everything evolving at such a super, fast speed right now, I have seen how leaders, sometimes even coaches, outsource the deepest thinking into this wonderful tool called AI. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with using it as a sparring partner. Try to see if what you have in mind makes sense. But there comes a point where you have to do the hard thinking, where you have to do the preparation for the next boardroom, because in the boardroom, you're unlikely to be able to tap into this thing. And so you better be prepared. And do not waste your time in trying to predict how different members of the board are going to react to what you have to say. So that's probably my last closing statement for our call today.
Then let's start wrapping up our conversation for today. And we have a closing tradition. So perhaps what you just said aren't your last words. And I'm curious. We talked a lot about business and leadership, but what are you genuinely curious about as an individual that has nothing to do with your professional domain, with business, something on the personal side?
Well, I mean, our family is rooting for Germany to hopefully win the World Cup. The timing of the games doesn't really work for us based here in Dubai. They usually are at 9 o'clock or 11, sometimes at 1 a.m. And so we are trying to play catch up. But that's the one passion of us, hoping and rooting for a football team and seeing how far they can push.
And is there someone or something that is inspiring you right now, like a particular leader, a book, an idea, something else that you would like to share with our audience?
The one book I would recommend any leader to buy is from a fellow coach. His name is 𝐘𝐿, and he wrote that book about a decade ago. It's called The Coaching Habit. And the simple but very powerful idea behind his book is that you don't have to do it the way I did it, which it was a 3-year journey to become a coach. You can all be more coach-like in your interactions with your employees if you resist the urge to offer wisdom and advice every single time they come to you with a challenge and respond by asking them some insightful questions. So that one simple habit, and obviously it's much more sophisticatedly laid out in his book, is the book I would recommend any leader to read and start to implement in their leadership.
Well, then let's wrap up. And if our audience members remember just one thing from our conversation, one insight, one way of thinking differently, or one action that they should take, what would you want that to be?
I would have to cite my good mentor, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who said, "What got you here won't get you there."
It's an interesting thought. Well, Navid, thank you for this conversation and for joining me today on Business Unbound.
Thank you, Troy.